Hi, and I'd like to welcome you to another Todd Talk, where we take teaching theory and turn it into teaching practice. What we're going to be talking about today is in our theme of how can we challenge gifted students in the classroom, is we're going to be looking at the use of mentors. Mentors can be used in a couple of ways. So one way is informally. So an informal mentor would be like if you pair a freshman up with a senior at school and you ask the senior to look after them and help them get to their classes and just generally give them the lay of the land of how high school works. That would be a very informal mentorship where they're not meeting all the time and they're meeting as needed, and it's just an opportunity for the freshman to work with the senior and to get some, what they learned through their own experiences. The second type of mentorship is a structured mentorship. A structured mentorship is kind of like an apprenticeship. So you might have, like, for instance, I had a mentor, a teacher when I student taught. And so this is the teacher that I learned from and had questions to, and I was with them all of the time. They were observing me all the time. And ironically enough, that person 25 years ago, he's still mentoring me to this very day. So it's a very structured, it's become more informal now, but it was very structured at first. And so that's what a structured mentorship looks like, is that you do have scheduled meetings, you do have objectives that you're trying to get done, you do have an end goal for what you're trying to accomplish with this mentorship. So those are kind of the two types of mentorships that you can do. So why do mentors with gifted students? So there's a couple reasons. First off, gifted kids have asynchronous issues, which is that they don't necessarily have peer mates. They have age mates. So for better or for worse, the way that we do school is when kids turn a certain age, they all enter kindergarten at the same time. But we know that they enter at different levels of thinking and learning. But you usually move up, with this group the rest of your school career. There are exceptions, there's acceleration, there's grade skipping, but for the most part, you're going to be with kids who are the same age as you. The problem is they might not think like you. And so you don't have any peers in your grade. You have age mates. And so finding a peer can be really important. And that's what a mentor can provide. One thing I noticed in my own experiences is that gifted kids tend to gravitate towards adults because they can have that conversation with the adult that they can't have with their age mates. So they can find a peer, but the peer is obviously much older than them. So with the mentor, part of this is putting them with someone that is a peer to them, that they could learn from, that they could look up to, that they could respect and want to learn because of that. So that's one thing. The second advantage to mentorship or having a mentor is you could learn a very valuable skill. Either that you could use in college or that you can use in career. So if you are someone who mentors with let's say you're in architecture, when you're interested in that, and you follow an architecture and they mentor you, they may give you really valuable advice that's going to help your career later on. And that can start really young. It doesn't have to be like high school or junior high. It could be elementary kids who are interested in something, and whether they're going to, pursue this career or not. A third reason is sometimes we assume that all gifted kids are from socioeconomic advantaged homes, and that's not necessarily the case. There are just as many socially economically disadvantaged gifted students that there are advantaged. So we have to remember that sometimes a mentor can be someone who is going to be someone that they can give life advice to, or they can look up to. So for example, I participated in a mentorship program here in my school system where we went to an elementary, and I was partnered up with a couple of students, and every week we had a different theme. And we would talk about those things, and I would share my experiences and they would share their experiences. And they were just seeing someone that maybe they could possibly look up to. And so this provided them with a model for what they might want to achieve in their own lives. The fourth thing is that school for some gifted kids can be really boring. So having something that excites them or interests them or that is engages them is going to be really important. And so if they are talking to an expert on something that they're really interested in, they are going to be so much more motivated. They're going to see the relevance of what it is that they're learning. I mean, the truth is a lot of what we learn in schools is not relevant to our later lives. But if you match up the right mentor, what they can provide is a lot of relevance, and a lot of you know showing students what it is that they may how they may use this in their own lives later on. Lastly, uh, studies have shown that girls, especially, really benefit from mentorship. Kaufman did a study, and he looked at girls who were mentored, and then he looked at them 15 years later. And what he found is that 15 years later, these women made equal pay that men did in their same profession. So it gave them the confidence to maybe pursue some careers that were not necessarily ones that they had been encouraged to before. I know a lot of girls are not confident in math and science because they don't have a support system, or they don't have a mentor in place that helps them be confident in that, even though they are just as bright, if not more bright, than men in those particular subject areas. And so it can provide that. So, what type of mentors should you look for your kids and students? What type are there? So I'm going to break it down into 5 different types of mentors. The first one is an expert, or someone who has expertise. So, for example, when I was teaching future city building, I am not an engineer. And yet students had to city plan, they had to create something in their city that was a renewable resource for energy, and just things that were out of my level of expertise. And so what we did was we partnered them with students from the nearby university who were engineering students. And each group got a different mentor. And this person then helped them with their expert knowledge they shared with this student, and gave them advice and what was practical and what would work and what wouldn't work. So this expertise can be really important. And so having pairing up a student with someone who's an expert on something is going to give them an education that goes beyond what you can provide. Because as a teacher, a lot of times we're expected to be the expert on everything, but that's not possible. And so if you can find someone who's even more of an expert and hook them up with the student, then the student is going to benefit as a result. The second type of mentor is experience. So this is a mentor that has a certain experience in something, and they can offer that experience, share that experience with a student. So for example, a writing mentor is a good example of this. So teaching writing is something that's really challenging to do. And so it's a process. It's not just learning it, overnight. It's a long process. And so having someone there in the process to share their experiences with you and what they did in their own journey to be a writer can be really valuable for a gifted student. I've seen writing mentors really benefit students because they can say, okay, this is what worked for me, and this is what might not work for you, or this is something you can try that I tried, or this is something you might want to avoid. But they brought their experience of doing that. There are other ones where, like, we had clubs at one of our schools, and so we had people that had experience in certain things come in. Like, one was experienced at knitting, and so she came in and taught kids how to knit. There was another one that brought in the idea of doing stock markets. They were someone who had experience in working with the stock market, and so they mentored a group of kids that were doing that. And so it can be just the experience that a person brings to a mentorship. They don't necessarily have to be an expert, but they have experience in that. Exposure. So exposure is that the student is being exposed to something that they normally wouldn't within the confines of the 4 school walls. Career mentors are an excellent example of this. I used to have my 7th graders do a career paper, and part of the requirement is that they had to find a mentor, and they had to shadow that mentor and learn about that and interview that person. And so what this did was expose kids to things that they weren't necessarily going to find in a book or in a video, or it exposed them to how it really was. So for example, part of the process was students learning that it was something that they didn't necessarily want to do the rest of their life. And this was very valuable. So for example, I had students that would say, you know what, I'm really good at arguing, so I want to be a lawyer. And then they would go and talk to a lawyer mentor, and the lawyer would tell them how much schooling they had to do and how much work it was. And all of a sudden the student was like, maybe this is not for me. So that's a really valuable thing to come to. There are other students who mentor doctors and then eventually went on to medical school and became doctors themselves because they were exposed to that. My wife, who's a pharmacist, her stepdad was a pharmacist, and she was exposed to what that looked like and what that entailed. And so she had it from a very young age. She wanted to be a pharmacist because of this exposure to that. And so that's what a mentor can do, is expose a student to an education that aren't necessarily going to get in school. The fourth is an educational mentor. So what I mean by that is universities are great places to look for people who have educational knowledge that maybe you don't. So for example, I had a student in the 5th grade who was learning about layering and ice shelves and all these things. And so I connected her with someone from the Ohio State University, a local university nearby. And this guy had her come down to his office, and he mentored her on her paper that she was writing. And it turned out this guy was an international expert on this, but he had taken the time to do this. I have found in a lot of cases that when you ask someone to be a mentor, someone to reach out, they're more than likely to do it. There are a lot of organizations that require mentorship. And so whether it be, through law or medicine or engineering or whatever. And so, there's a lot of resources out there that you can tap into, and the university is a great place to start. Another place to look for is, going to those organizations themselves. So if you go to the architecture, our organization, they have a mentorship program that you can kind of get into and get your students attached to. The last type of mentor is one that isn't necessarily academic in nature, but it's emotional in nature. So this is finding an SEL mentor, someone that can mentor students on how to take self-care, how to make sure that they're not suffering from anxiety or perfectionism and other traits that some gifted students have. And so having someone that can come in and do meditation with the students, or do yoga with them, or to have conversations with them, maybe tough conversations. If someone a teacher has passed away and you need to have conversations with those kids, we as teachers are not necessarily experts on grief, but we could bring in mentors that could talk to those students about that. So it is important that the social emotional aspect is adhered to, or it is attended to just as much as the academic with gifted students. And so a social emotional mentor can be a really valuable way for that to happen. So what I encourage you to do then is, if you have a student who is gifted in your classroom and they seem to be moving beyond what you're capable of providing them, then try to find a mentor for them. And again, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Go through mentoring programs, or look what's out there and try to get a student partnered with someone who's going to provide a really valuable learning experience, something that they'll probably remember the rest of their lives.